Hey friend, I'm Hannah Lapsansky, and you're listening to the Moms Grab Coffee podcast, where moms share how they find peace and joy in the chaotic beauty that is motherhood. If you're stressed, overwhelmed, and exhausted, come join us to fill yourself up with hope and wisdom from moms who are in it too, and who will always point you back to Jesus.
And so I just hit this breaking point where I was so heartbroken, and I realized, am I going to let this break me? Am I going to let this break my faith or not? And so I just dug in and cried out to God. And honestly, that heartbreaking experience became a catalyst for my spiritual growth.
Hey friend, how are you doing? Are you doing all right? This time of year can feel so exciting and so magical, but at the same time, it can feel really anxious and overwhelming, right? So many things that need to get done, so many things that maybe we just want to do for ourselves, for our kids, for our families. It can be a lot. It can surely be a lot. So as things get supercharged this season, or maybe they're already supercharged for you, I want to encourage you to take tiny pauses throughout your day, breathe deep, say a breath prayer, give God a chance to speak into your life at that moment, and refresh yourself. I just did an episode with Tara Banks last week on that very idea, taking tiny pauses. How do we do it? What are we supposed to do when we pause? So if you need some ideas, some advice, some encouragement, I encourage you to go check that out. Another way we can feel encouraged is to hear stories from moms who are also going through what you may be going through now or have gone through in the past. Not feeling alone, feeling like you can relate to someone else. So that's what today's episode is about. Hailing from Minneapolis, I have Kelley Spencer on the show today. She's a mom to 2 boys and a writer whose work was published in Dayspring's book, Sweet Tea for the Soul, Comforting Real-Life Stories for Grieving Hearts. She writes about her mental health challenges and how that skyrocketed after she miscarried her baby, but how that was also a catalyst for major spiritual growth. She's also going to share ideas on what to do when you feel overwhelmed. And there is one very powerful physical act that she does that I think is a very symbolic representation of giving something to God. So stick around for that. I think you're going to feel so refreshed when you engage in that act. All right, Mama, so get ready to be encouraged. It is my pleasure to welcome Kelley and her story. You know, when you think about mental health, it can change and alter as you walk through different seasons of life. So what did mental health look like before you became a mom? And then afterwards, how did things shift?
Yeah, I would say I didn't really deal with any symptoms until I was about 24 years old. So it was a little bit more new to me. Now I had experienced it through witnessing others in my family battle mental illness. But for me, it started creeping in, just little anxieties in the job I was at, waking up, feeling that angst, that fear in my body. And honestly, after I became a mom, it grew tenfold. Like, it felt like there was a clear distinction between before motherhood and after motherhood. And I just felt like there were so many things to worry about, as many new moms feel. You're transitioning to caring for a newborn. You're struggling to find time for yourself. And so I just found myself in this dance between the two, trying to figure out how to navigate life. And I became just very, very overwhelmed with everything I felt like I was supposed to do and the many roles that I had been given.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that weight. You often hear that you don't really know what motherhood will be like until you're actually in it. And everyone's experiences are so different, but also so similar, right? But that weight, I think, is something that everyone feels. And so what did you do to cope through that period?
Well, for me, because it was new and I didn't have a lot of knowledge of it and what I should do and what I shouldn't do, I felt like I was fighting it. I was not accepting it. I felt very ashamed for feeling like that. And as a new mom, a lot of times this is the happiest time in your life. And so if you experience postpartum depression, there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with feeling that way. So I sometimes just let my mind spiral. And I didn't really realize what was in my control and what was out of my control. I avoided or isolated myself at times, just not getting back to text messages from friends. Sometimes avoiding situations that I thought would cause me more anxiety, which in turn created more and more anxiety. So I had a lot of just negative and poor coping skills.
What did you think when it came to what should and what you shouldn't do? What were those things?
Well, I realized too that fighting it made it worse, and that a lot of the shame and things that I felt was just not accepting myself for me and not accepting the new me, that it was okay to have those bad days. It was okay to feel overwhelmed. I wasn't alone in this. Many other women struggle with it. And I just really needed to give myself grace, which was a big, big struggle for me to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're so right, especially when we are on social media. We want to usually showcase the best of us.
Yes.
We don't necessarily share the struggles that we're going through, which I think can make it hard when we do feel that challenge.
Yes. And I think a lot of times we just put these really high expectations on ourselves. And we might not even realize that they're there. Sometimes it's unconscious habits that we have. And we just have to take a step back and realize like what we're putting on ourselves, and that it only adds more pressure that really isn't needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, as you're going through this struggle, what was your relationship with God at that time?
It was, I would say, a little stagnant. I would say a little distant. I kind of allowed my mental health struggles to kind of form a wedge between me and God. And to be honest, I felt very disqualified and not good enough and ashamed for how I felt. And so I, in turn, felt like God was disappointed in me.
Mm. When you say disqualified from what?
I think from just the joyful life and abundant life that Jesus talks about, I felt like I was constantly failing or falling short of that. And I just carried that every single day with me.
Mm-hmm. And your testimony on Her View from Home speaks to the opposite of that and encourages us to look to God even if we are struggling and in that chaos and can't get out of it. So that's a pretty big shift in how you felt in terms of feeling like God was disappointed in you and that you were disqualified. So how did you make that shift?
Well, for me, honestly, I just hit a very low point. I had experienced a miscarriage with my second pregnancy, which oftentimes grief can exacerbate mental health symptoms even more. And so I just hit this breaking point where I was so heartbroken, and I realized, am I going to let this break me? Am I going to let this break my faith or not? And so I just dug in and cried out to God. And honestly, that heartbreaking experience became a catalyst for my spiritual growth. It grew me so much closer to God. I had this prompting to read the Bible in a year. And so I signed up and did like a Bible reading plan, and I stuck to it. And I'm so proud of myself for doing that, even in the trenches of motherhood, because that big decision is what shaped everything after.
That's awesome. And so this miscarriage was your catalyst point. Was that after you had your first baby?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So it sounds like as after you had your first baby, so you became a mom, you really struggled. But that wasn't really the point that prompted you to grow your faith. So I guess
Mhm.
um, you had other coping mechanisms to get you through that. And then you had your miscarriage, which then prompted your growth.
Correct. I think sometimes it's those painful experiences that can really draw us closer to God if we allow it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you allow it to happen, you could still get the promptings, but you have to make the decision to then take action. And reading the Bible
Absolutely.
in a year, that's really impressive. I've tried that so many different times and failed miserably.
It's tough. It is tough.
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline. So tell me about that year. What did so you
Yeah.
read the Bible? What else did you do to keep trusting God to get you through that really hard season?
I did a lot of prayer and meditating on the Bible and what I was learning, and I just really started to loosen my grip overall on life and my anxiety. And slowly, I just felt this burden just lift off of me, like it was a boulder or something that was crushing me. Like it was just such a difference. And I just let God speak into those broken parts and in the fear in my life. And I just felt it come up off of me, like something I just can't necessarily put into words, but I know it was Him. And even when I struggled showing up some days, being overtired, I just always gave it to God. And I just feel like He shifted my perspective and He renewed me every time I needed it.
Mm, amazing. And so as you were going through this year of processing, how have you seen God show up? Because I think when we see glimpses of God in our life, in terms of, his faithfulness, his goodness, his kindness, that gives us more hope. And it also brings a level of reality about God, right? Like he is real, he is there for us. So, can you tell me a little bit more about how God showed up during that season?
Yes, I think just in the early time when I was grieving, He was just there. His presence, feeling Him there with me was exactly what I needed when I was so heartbroken. And as I started rising up out of it, I was praying for things like getting professional help and talking to a therapist and guidance with that. And so then I allowed those people to step in as well and to help me through, that traumatic experience. And I just saw with every step of obedience that I took towards God, I saw all these moments of faithfulness and His unconditional love and grace. And He was truly just bringing beauty from ashes that I just didn't think was possible and I couldn't have imagined.
Did you have to actively look for them, or did his presence kind of surprise you?
I think His presence surprised me a little bit, but I think that the more I realized that even if I took a baby step of faith, that was enough, that I just wanted to take another one and another one and another one until I just looked back. And I was keeping a prayer journal at the time, and I still try to practice this, but I was looking back, just seeing the evolution of my prayers and how everything had played out. And I was piecing together everything, just saying, like, look, God, look at what you've done in this past year. And I just wanted more of that.
I just visualized a mountain. It's like you take your one step and you look back and you're like, all right, made a little bit of progress. But as you get higher and higher, you see all of those steps that you made growing. You see that, you see more of that mountain that you've climbed.
Yes. Yep.
Kelley, let's shift into the relationship between faith, mental health, and then mental health treatments like therapy. There can be, lots of perspectives on how those things work together, or, some people may feel like they don't work together or go together. What's your perspective on that?
hmm I would say, first of all, that our mental health can be used for good. And I see the good in it now, even when we struggle with it, that it can be used and channeled for good and God's purposes. That for me, it brings like a daily surrender, a daily moment of bringing me to my knees. When my anxiety is high. And for me, it served as a catalyst for my spiritual growth. And I think it can for other women too, if we choose to give it to Him and we don't choose to stay in a perpetual state of anxiety.
Yeah, just yesterday I was in a pretty anxious moment and my thoughts just started swirling and spiraling, and um, my thoughts were saying, hey, you should be anxious about this, you should be feeling like this is going to be a make or break moment. And I had to give it to God at that moment because my heart started beat like I started feeling the physical effects as well. It wasn't just like my mind, but my heart started beating faster. I felt like I was, breaking out into a sweat, and I just sat there and said, God is sovereign, God is sovereign, God is sovereign. He's in control. And I felt the physical parts of my body slow down, my heart slow down, and that those anxious thoughts stop swirling. And so, what are some of the ways that you give your anxiety to God?
Well, something I have done in the past that really helps me is if I'm overwhelmed by a number of things, I will journal or write down on a piece of paper everything I'm feeling, unfiltered, and offer every single thing up in prayer to God. And just the act of writing it down, looking at it, and then sending it off to Him and is just so therapeutic. And it really helps me to offload how I'm feeling and to offer it to the one, the comforter and someone who can take it all from me so that I don't have to carry it anymore.
Love that. So, what do you do with that piece of paper?
Sometimes I rip it up and it just feels good, honestly, to just get it off my chest. I mean, sometimes I save it if it's something that I could revisit at another time.
I actually like the thought of ripping it up. It's like you're,
Yeah.
the physical act of it, because giving it to God, when you put a physical activity against it, like ripping it up and like, here you go, God. It's like you're taking it off. It's kind of like the whole, Jesus carrying your burdens. Yeah, I love that. Actually, I'm gonna try that. Awesome. So, Kelley, I'm going to go back to the way you perceived yourself as a daughter of Christ, which was, you felt disqualified. You felt like you weren't good enough in the eyes of God. What has your journey taught you about who God is?
Well, I've just learned that He is stability and He is unchanging. And so when I was going through so many ups and downs with my mental health, He was the stability that I needed, that I desperately needed, that I couldn't have any other way. And when I was broken and had those low points, He was my comforter. He was always there for me, waiting. And His unconditional love and grace was exactly what I needed in those moments.
Yeah, and in the chaos of motherhood now, when you see the laundry piling up, when you see the dishes stacked up, when your house is a complete mess, when you feel like you're not living up to what you think motherhood should look like, what's the first thing you do?
I think just recognizing it first and then trying to reframe it in any way, even if it's as simple as speaking an affirmation of God's not disappointed in me. I am enough. I am worthy. I am chosen. Whatever it is, it's going to help me reframe that. And then I just tell myself third is one step at a time. Because sometimes I get overwhelmed with too much on my plate, like many women. And if I just break it down to a couple, priorities, then I'm not as overwhelmed. Or if I say one thing first, one thing, then it kind of helps with my brain and how I process and do things.
Yeah, so laser focus and
Yes,
going back to those little baby steps.
exactly.
One story that has come up in my mind over and over the last few days is I forget if it's I think it might be in Luke or maybe Matthew. This is me trying to get through the Bible as well, but the story where Jesus visits Mary and Martha, and Mary, she goes and spends time with Jesus. Martha's preparing the house and trying to get everything in order. What came to my mind just now is the fact that the house may have been disorganized. Mary could have, gone and washed the dishes and dusted and basically did what Martha was doing. But what she did was go to Jesus first. All of that mess is still there, but she's going to go to Jesus first. And then maybe she goes and helps Martha or, goes through her tasks, so to speak. I love giving it to God first.
Yes, I agree. I think that's so important. And as moms, sometimes I think we we get overwhelmed with everything, and Jesus does come last. When we're in that state of almost in panic, then we go to him. And so you're right. I've tried to be more intentional with this myself and prioritizing my time with God first, early in the morning, you know, just having that daily discipline of getting in the Word, doing a Bible study, whatever it looks like that morning. And then that feeds and fuels into the rest of my day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it. So, Kelley, I want to ask about your mental health in particular. As you look back at your journey, what does your mental health today look like in motherhood?
It just looks like more of an equilibrium. It looks like, yes, there's some bad days, there's some ups and downs, but I know where to go with it. I know that I don't have to stay in, like I said, this perpetual state of anxiety, or if I'm feeling depression symptoms, I know what to do with it and where to go. And I don't feel like I'm fighting it as much. I'm more accepting of those symptoms and myself. And now I see myself how God sees me, which is the key for me to just shifting my whole perspective on what mental health and mental illness looks like.
Yeah, and you mentioned therapy before, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about that because God is certainly the ultimate healer of many different things, not just mental health. But therapy, I think, can also be, a gift from God. Can you tell me a little bit about your perspective on therapy as it relates to God and the faith?
Absolutely. I think therapy is so essential. And I think oftentimes God works through these amazing therapists to provide healing. And so I don't think it has to be this one you either you pick God or you pick professional help. No, I think that God, through prayer and prompting from him and guidance, he can work and do amazing things through qualified therapists. And so I myself have just developed a no shame. If I feel it, I'm going to go in and talk to someone. I've seen a multitude of different people for different reasons and different seasons. And I have just seen so much positive change in me from getting the professional help that I needed and helping me with things like my self talk and reframing and all of these strategies that are at my disposal now. And honestly, I knew that it was something that was research based and that was needed, but it all started for me with a prompting from God to utilize those resources.
Interesting. What did that prompting look like? Like, what was that moment where you said, yes, I'm going to choose to go see a professional.
Yeah, it took a series of prayers, and at one of those low points when I was kind of starting to come out of my depression, I was really just seeking and praying to God with my prayer journal and saying, like, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And over I just felt like, with what I had read about different types of trauma, and I'm like, you need to go see someone. There is grief counselors out there for a reason. There is trauma informed therapists for a reason, and they are going to help you work through this past experience so that you can rise up out of it. It will always be with you, but you can have an entirely new perspective on the past and what has happened.
Mm, yes, indeed. So, Kelley, I always like to ask guests to provide some words of hope to moms who are struggling. So, what's something you'd like to say to a mom who's really struggling, either with maybe they're just in the daily mess of motherhood, maybe it's just really like those tasks that they have to get done, just never feels like they are done, or they're struggling with their mental health. What's something you'd like to say to them?
I would like to say that God is not disappointed in you. He has nothing but love and grace for you, and He wants to meet you exactly where you're at right now. Whether that looks like 20 minutes, maybe while you're breastfeeding or pumping, and or holding a baby or dealing with a tantrum and having to close the Bible. Like, I mean, he will meet you wherever you are at in whatever increments you decide to meet him in.
Yeah. And before you touched upon obedience, I think it's making that decision to meet with God, whether it's for 5 seconds, because that's all you have,
Hmm.
or for
Hmm.
longer. I think it's that that decision is also an act of obedience.
Yes, and I think just learning to, even in those moments like you're chauffeuring kids one place, any moment is a time to pray. There's so many times I'm driving and I'm praying, or I'm going for a quick walk and I'm praying. And so I always am looking for those small moments as an opportunity to meet with God, even if it's a brief moment.
Yeah, I love that. You wrote an article called Radical Obedience for Dayspring, which, I mean, radical obedience, wow, wouldn't we all love to get there, right? Can you tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that?
So that was actually published in a book called Sweet Tea for the Soul, Comforting Real Life Stories for Grieving Hearts. And so it was a book geared towards grief. And that was a big example that when I first had my miscarriage, I could barely utter the words I had a miscarriage. It was that painful for me. And God was telling me that He was going to use this, He was going to use my story. And I didn't know how. And then years later, there is an opening for submissions. And I knew I had exactly the story that was needed. And I felt this strong prompting from the Holy Spirit to submit it. And so I did, and it was published in a book. It was a year ago from this last September.
Wow, that must have felt pretty exciting but scary.
It was, yeah, but I just saw again God's faithfulness through it, and that He planted that in me for a reason, and that even though it was heartbreaking, He could use words, that of encouragement that He had spoken to me to speak to other people. And so I just wanted to pay that forward so desperately that I was like, I'm going to put it all out there, and just see what God does with it.
Yes, and you're writing more and more on your blog. You're also coming out or working on a book about mental health and faith. Can you tell me a little bit more
I am.
about what moms can find with your writing?
Yes, I do write a lot about mental health and specifically anxiety and depression, a little bit about panic, because those are all things that I have battled myself for over the last decade. And so, yes, I'm currently working on a nonfiction self help type book, faith based, of course, and it's written for Christian women that are living with mental illness. And it's really to offer encouragement, some lifestyle changes that have helped me, and really just to help them heal mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It's really like an all comprehensive type of book.
Awesome. And do you have a release date for that?
Not yet. It's in the works. I'm pitching to agents currently, so prayers for that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Amazing, Kelley. Well, thank you so much for sharing your heart today. Where can moms go to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Yes, thanks for having me. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Kelley, that's with an EY, Spencer Writes. So Kelley Spencer Writes.
Amazing. Well, Kelley, I know it's really hard to talk about your struggles and challenges and mental health in particular. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable. I'll have all the links to connect with Kelley in the show notes, as well as my website. And Kelley, once that book comes out, I'll update the show notes as well. So everyone be sure to check it out.
Thanks so much.
All right, friend, that was Kelley Spencer, and I hope her testimony encouraged you and you feel like you're not alone. A lot of moms feel that we are failing to meet the expectations of what it means to be a mom because we are constantly bombarded with things around us that are telling us, hey, you got to do better, you got to do better. Before we close out, I want to point you to a scripture passage that I read this past week. And it's in John 9. It is when Jesus heals a man born blind. Now, if we associate the born blind portion as our limitations, maybe we weren't born with limitations, maybe our mental health struggles and other feelings of failing were acquired as we became mothers. But here's the passage I want to read, John 9, verse 3. Now, before this, the disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? John 9:3, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, our limitations are going to constantly tell us, you're not enough, you can't do it, you don't have what you need to succeed. you're failing. That's what our limitations tend to do, right? But what I want to remind you is that our limitations have a purpose, said John 9:3. If we choose to allow God to work through those limitations, if we choose to surrender them, He can turn them for good. He can turn them into something powerful, and it can become one of your greatest testimonies. Just like Kelley said, her mental health challenges were so debilitating, but they also became the catalyst for spiritual growth. And now she's encouraging so many women with that very testimony, with that very limitation. So let's acknowledge our limitations as a path to bringing us closer to God and its power to bring us to our knees. To connect with Kelley and learn more about her story, I will have links in the show notes to her website as well as her social channels. All right, my mama friends, I hope you have a beautiful, hope-filled Thanksgiving week. And I'll catch you again next time for a cup of coffee with a side of faith, wisdom, and hope.